Ross was a fantastic young man, the kind of son that any parent would be proud of, and we were certainly extremely proud of him and remain proud of him to this day. He was a devoted family man. He loved his little son, Charlie, who's just 3 years old, and enjoyed nothing better than to play with Charlie, take him swimming. Ross was quite active and sporty, and he couldn't go to his tennis club or to the gym because of COVID. The last time we saw him was at Christmas. We stuck to the rules, and that was the last time we saw him face to face. We spoke to him virtually every day on FaceTime. But Ross was funny. He was, we had many great laughs together. He was a dynamic, charismatic young man who was full of life and love. He loved his family, but he was someone who suffered terribly with severe depression, and he battled for more than 10 years to fight that depression, and he fought very hard and tried most things to try and overcome it and reach salvation. Ross thought that he had cracked it, to use his phrase. He had to find and pay for his own counsellor, and he particularly related to his last counsellor and thought that he turned the corner, and then the depression came back with a vengeance, and we'll never know for sure, but we think that that's what finally pulled the rug from under Ross's feet, and he took his life on the 21st of February.
On paper, he had so much to live for. A beautiful little boy that we've seen in your video footage, a fiancé, a loving family, a great life. How much of a factor do you think lockdown was in that final decision to take his life?
Lockdown and the restrictions associated with it didn't kill Ross. It wasn't that took his life, but it certainly added to the weight of the burden that he was carrying. He was due to marry his fiancée, Charlotte, last year. That had to be postponed because of lockdown. Her wedding dress is buried alongside Ross. They were waiting to get married when the restrictions were starting to be eased. And along with all the sort of restrictions that I mentioned earlier, to do with his sort of active sporting life and to do with his family in particular, played quite a hand in what happened to Ross. But he was also very frustrated with the mental health services. We know that there are many fantastically dedicated people working out there within the mental health services, but Ross was frustrated that having tried so hard and tried so many things for 10 years, that he was then put on a waiting list for 6 months, and he died while he was on that waiting list for therapy. And my view is, and what I'm trying to get across now, is that, Ross had what I regard as cancer of the mind. He was, in effect, terminally ill. And if someone turns up at a doctor's doors or at a hospital's doors with terminal cancer, they aren't turned away for 6 months and told to come back after that period. The mental health provision in this country, I am learning since we lost Ross, is woefully inadequate when it comes to crisis care. And when somebody has taken the very brave step of contacting the authorities to say that is how they feel, there isn't really the help for them. I've been talking to a lot of people on social media and talking about my family's story and about Ross in particular. And I've been inundated with the messages from people who are in a situation like me and my family, who also say that their son, their daughter, their father, their mother, their cousin, whatever, they also died while on a waiting list. And I think that there has to be some kind of parity with physical illness. And we have to take these statistics very, very seriously, much more seriously than we do at the moment. In a few years, God willing, COVID will be a distant memory, but the suicide rate will still amount to a pandemic year in, year out, every year around the globe, 800,000 people around the world every year. It's the biggest killer of men under the age of 45 in this country. Not cancer, not drugs, not road accidents, suicide. Young men are the biggest threat to their own futures and their own lives. I was always shocked by that statistic, even before Ross died. And the fact that 75% of people who take their own lives are men is something that we have to look far more seriously at. Every suicide is an equal tragedy, be it a man or a woman. But there is a particular problem with men, and I think it's a cultural, societal problem that we also need to address.
Ross wrote a farewell letter to members of his family. Am I right in thinking, Mike, that he wanted you to do this now, to carry on this work, to raise awareness of mental health issues and the lack of support that he was able to access in those final months?
He did. It was quite a long letter, and Ross was particularly fond of a charity called CALM, C-A-L-M, Campaign Against Living Miserably, and he asked his family to go on campaigning. He addressed each one of us in turn, and he said to his son Charlie, who'll be 4 next month, that he thought he could possibly live on through Charlie without the faults. We, of course, as parents, didn't think that Ross had any faults. But yeah, that was one of the things. And his brother and sister, Tom and Laura, and his mum, Glenys, we've all been involved in the campaign to try and raise awareness, to try and change the language around men's health and men's mental health in particular, to try and get rid of the stigma. For example, you know, we talk about manning up when men are going through difficult times. There's a phrase, strong silent type, for example. And all of these things, I think, mean shut up. Don't express it. Take it on the chin. If you're vulnerable, you're weak. And if there's anything that I would like to get across in Ross's name and in Ross's memory, it's that message that to all people who are suicidal, but young men in particular, if you are vulnerable and you ask for help, that is a strength. If you cry, that is not a weakness. We men in particular have to be more open about this. And if we can't get the language right and we can't get rid of the stigma, what progress will we ever make?
And Mike, in your experience in the months following Ross's death, how comfortable do you think people are talking to you about it?
In most cases, people have been exceptionally kind and caring. We have great, we're very close to our family. Our immediate family has always been very close. We did speak to Ross a lot about his problems with mental health. And we're supporting each other, we're clinging to each other. We get a great deal of help from the wider family and friends and neighbours, and people from all over the world have made contact with me to express their condolences, and I can't thank them enough from the bottom of my heart. I always used to think, as a Sky News correspondent, when we had to speak to people who were bereaved for some reason, I always used to worry about what I could say or do, and came to the conclusion, I guess, that there was nothing that I could really say or do to ease their pain. But since we lost Ross, I've realised that actually knowing that people are there, they've got your back, and they're ready to sort of catch you if you fall, does make a difference. And what I would say to people is, I understand if you feel uncomfortable talking about suicide. It's a highly, highly sensitive subject. And different people deal with it in different ways. I can only speak for myself and my family. And I think mostly we feel that we would rather speak about Ross and talk about the happy memories that we've got, because even if we wanted to, we'd never forget him, because he was that kind of person. We don't want to forget him. He made the wrong decision, and I think he would ultimately have found salvation. Suicide is never the answer. But that said, we'll always be so proud to have had him as our son.
Mike, thank you so much for sharing Ross's story and talking to us today. Mike McCarthy there.